They are a drug addict, a historian, a serial killer, a hopeless romantic, all at the same time.
Vampires are supposed to be awful. The stink of the grave, his fated breath. It was supposed to be ugly and nasty.
And then there was Twilight.
What's good about a Twilight movie is it makes everybody who watches it feel like a 13-year-old girl.
Yeah, hand in your man card. You clearly have other priorities in mind.
They've always been, since Anne Rice anyway, allowed to be gay or bisexual.
Carmilla as the lesbian portrayal of vampires dates back to 1872, which was over a century before Anne Rice published her first book. I swear they're doing this on purpose. My sentiments exactly. Good to see all that goodwill built up by the previous Creature Features episode immediately squandered. You know you're dealing with the non-intuitive when you're referencing Twilight in a vampire documentary, completely oblivious or outright dismissive of the core audience.
I am Dracula.
Created in 1897 by novelist Bram Stoker, Dracula is a true icon of horror. But Stoker's Dracula was far more monstrous than the polished aristocrats we think of today.
I grew up reading Dracula and reading about the stink of the grave, the graveyard earth that the vampire was in with the worms crawling in it, about his fated breath. It was supposed to be ugly and nasty.
There have been many Draculas since Lugosi and Lee, but one truly stands out. Gary Oldman in Francis Ford Coppola's epic 1992 adaptation.
So after that repulsive love puppy introduction, I'm glad Bram Stoker's Dracula gets some shine since that classic is criminally underrated.
I loved Coppola's Dracula. Just the level of art direction, just how creative that was as a film. And what a mood it set. When he was doing Dracula point of view stuff, the way that he shot that was so exhilarating.
We're strong in the Lord and the power of his might. Ex umbris in luce. I bring you from shadow into light. I cast you out, the prince of darkness.
That changed the filmic Dracula mythos. And in fact, you could argue that we're still riding the wave from that film.
One of the reasons that Dracula has persisted for so long, as opposed to the Frankenstein monster, as opposed to the Wolfman or the Mummy, was he was a character. He was a genuine character.
The first unauthorized adaptation of Dracula was the German silent film Nosferatu. It was released in 1922, 4 years after the end of the First World War.
And you watch the original Nosferatu, it was terrifying, and I thought it was so cool that Tobe Hooper went to that kind of vampire in Salem's Lot. Bald vampire with the teeth like that always freaked me out.
Figure now's as good a time as any to remind you guys, if you haven't caught my own input on Nosferatu, check out the Mind's Eye's Shadows of the Vampire for 10 movies inspired by this landmark film.
The first official adaptation of Dracula starred the incomparable Bela Lugosi.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
I find it fascinating that anybody for years, decades to come, who wanted to imitate Count Dracula did it with a Hungarian accent.
I am Dracula.
Greetings, it is I, the Count.
Welcome to Hotel Transylvania.
Pretend to drink, at least. Such fine crystal shouldn't go to waste.
Anne Rice dominates modern vampire fiction.
Gee, I guess that puts Twilight and True Blood's authors in their place.
Vampires have
That's certainly a mouthful. No apologies. None.
The story follows the centuries-long relationship between the vampire Lestat and Louis, a troubled New Orleans aristocrat. Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, two of the biggest stars of modern times, played the leads.
The Paris Opera's in town. We can try some French cuisine.
Forgive me if I have a lingering respect for life.
Films like this are what I refer to when I criticize modern horror. Who was the last big name you remember to come into or out of a scary movie? This genre used to attract big name actors or serve as a star-making vehicle. Now don't get me wrong, Tom Cruise already had Top Gun and A Few Good Men under his belt, but this was before Mission Impossible, and Interview ranks right alongside those movies and was a movie star performance for both actors.
Lestat, who just enjoys and revels in all of it.
Why do you do this? I like to do it. I enjoy it.
And there was a lot of controversy about casting Tom Cruise, but between Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, and Kirsten Dunst, I thought they really nailed it. I was surprised. I went in skeptical, but came out a fan.
Anne Rice lost a daughter at a very young age. And Claudia in the novel was an homage to that.
Mama. Oh. Hush now, don't cry. We'll find her.
Mama.
Almost.
Using it as a cultural link with homosexuality.
Yes.
Are these two in the same scene?
Thanks to modern editing techniques, we can use existing footage to complete the film without Milhouse. Watch.
Looks like we're in trouble for that boy.
Jiminy Jillikers, radioactive man.
We'll have to fight our way out. Are you ready?
Yes.
Seamless, huh? You're fired. And with good cause.
When you couldn't deal with homosexuality, you could deal with it.
Sexuality? Yeah, can you even deal with it there, Stutters McDarting Eyes?
The many sides of vampires, the danger and the romance, the threat and the fun, were all on full display in the long-running HBO series True Blood, which debuted in 2008.
And we're off to the races. This show's inclusion on this list is devious at best, as anyone that actually bothered to watch it recognizes not just that this series took a nosedive, but how quickly it did. Oh, but it fought for a cause, so its messaging outweighs storytelling and character arcs.
Basically, vampires have been around forever, but they kind of come out of the closet, or the coffin, I should say, and they decide to live amongst the living.
It becomes a metaphor for so many different rights movements and how they're both ostracized. When I started on True Blood, all we knew about Pam at the beginning was that she was the lieutenant to this vampire, her maker, and that she cared about nothing else.
I find myself doubting whether you were ever truly human.
Thank you.
When the documentary bothers to talk about Pam as a character is when you actually enjoy the bright spots of when True Blood was watchable and how lovably bitchy her character was.
I'll give you 24 hours to deliver that witch to me.
And if you don't?
I will personally eat and kill all three of you.
Pam, objectifying, murdering, literally eating men was one of my favorite parts.
And then there's that. Imagine, if you will, a male actor admitting his enjoyment of his character objectifying and murdering women, and his career not immediately incinerating before your eyes.
Vampires just in general kind of go both ways, or kind of bisexual, they kind of whatever.
It's appealing because we live in the United States in a culture that is very sexual, and yet very sexually repressive. The idea of the vampire as a kind of sexy monster fits very well with the United States' kind of complicated relationship to sexuality.
This isn't a gay thing. Hell, it's not even a sexuality thing. You ask anybody, casual fan or hardcore enthusiast, Turning our most precious monster into a lifetime original romantic interest was a dead end that vampires still have not recovered from. Think about something. Women would hate if you only had a string of female roles only playing the love interest. Yet, that's somehow okay for the vampire. This has been relentlessly mocked, and rightfully so, by the horror faithful. For all the talk I've always heard how there aren't enough great werewolf films, I find that there are a lot of overrated vampire movies. The Lost Boys, Fright Night, Near Dark, From Dusk Till Dawn.
This is my kind of place.
In From Dusk Till Dawn, two violent criminals take refuge in a Mexican strip club. From Dusk Till Dawn reinvented vampires as nightmarish creatures that use sex to lure in their victims.
That's not a reinvention, stupid. Not only is that what vampires have been for quite some time, but sex and death is what you've been talking about for over a half an hour. Dracula, Interview with the Vampire, Innocent Blood. Try to keep up, Ellie. You were bungling facts from the history of horror. Now you're just blundering your way through this.
You can follow the rules of the genre that have been placed down by other movies or other stories, or you can kind of come up with your own.
The scariest and most powerful sequence in modern horror is the final sequence in Let the Right One In. A gang of bullies seize a very vulnerable child and shove him underwater. And there is a 2.5-minute shot of the boy's head being held underwater, and you're seeing him desperately trying to get back to the surface and breathe. But meanwhile, above the water, this pipsqueak vampire who loves the little boy has turned up and is beginning to butcher the bullies.
I hate to play spoiler, but I just played a large chunk of that scene for your viewing pleasure. Did that come off like the scariest sequence in modern horror to you?
Let the Right One In is about a boy called Oscar who is getting bullied in school, and he's a bit lonely. And one day he meets a girl called Eli, and then they became friends. What's special about my character, Eli, first of all, is that she's a vampire. She has lived for a very long time.
That slip up aside, I actually like Let the Right One In. This is one of the rare times I not only enjoy a foreign film and its American remake, but I would recommend both, as each has its strengths and weaknesses, and I think they go together as a pair.
What was beautiful about that story is that a monster comes to the rescue when humanity fails this young man, and who could blame him for choosing the monster when humanity was so horrible?
The title has a double meaning. It could mean that you should let the right person get into your life, or as it is for Eli, someone has to tell her that she can come in.
Du måste bjuda in mig.
Vad händer om jag inte gör det?
One aspect I liked about this film is, instead of making up its own rules, the thing I remembered is it showed what happens if one of those familiar rules are ever broken.
For me, the part of the vampire legend that has always remained really powerful is this idea that they have to be invited in.
Open the window, Mark.
Let me in. Let me in.
Let me in. It's okay, Mark. I'm your friend.
So many times in people's lives, you know, whatever that thing is that's draining them of their life and vitality, so often they invited it in.
Well, here goes. The moment we all knew was coming. Like sampling Thai food, it's best to just grit your teeth and hope you get through this one with your guts intact. It speaks to how repellent, sparkly vampires are that the 3.5 minutes they spent on Twilight felt like half this episode's runtime.
But in the 21st century, we've seen the two halves separate into the vampire as monstrous killer and the vampire as dreamboat boyfriend. Vampires, ever flexible, are being reshaped to suit audiences whose needs are often overlooked.
Oh, overlooked? You mean like horror fans?
Like the millions of women and teenage girls. Based on the best-selling books by Stephanie Meyer, Twilight reimagines the vampire story as a teen romance, told from a young woman's point of view.
Stephanie Meyer, she had a dream about this vampire. When the vampire was out in the sunlight, instead of withering, it did the opposite. It glowed and glittered and sparkled.
This is what I am.
Well, my vampires break a lot of the rules. If there can really be rules about fictional characters, you can do what you want.
Yeah, if you want to flagrantly tarnish an entire genre for the sake of YA training bras, am I right? I mean, think of the book sales.
You can't dismiss something that had such a giant hold on fandom. I remember going to Comic-Con a few years back when the second Twilight movie was coming out, and kids were camped out on the lawn for 24 hours. So obviously it had something to say.
And I suppose the message is what always prevails, huh? Watching these pathetic brown-nosers, especially that last cuck, fawn over Twilight rather than talk about Blade or Underworld just serves as a reminder that many within horror will happily sell out to soccer moms and their box wine if it means mainstream attention at the sacrifice of traditional horror and its fan base. Stepping out of the shadows for the sake of the spotlight.
I honestly find its gender and sexual politics pretty problematic. But that being said, I think it takes women's desires seriously in a way that most Hollywood cinema does not, most popular culture in general does not. The focus is more on her desire for Edward, on her attraction to Edward, and at some points, Jacob. It's not about them lusting after her.
As much as I understand broadening your audience, please understand that when you try to stray too far from your base in service of a casual market, as you saw from this intellectual, you inevitably bring all of their baggage along for the ride.
The whole vampire idea, the romantic vampire, has always been popular with teens, early 20s and things, particularly women, because it's seen as almost like no-fault sex. And after all, what's he really going to do? He's going to give you a great big hickey, like on Lover's Lane. But that's not the way it's supposed to be, to my mind.
Okay, so what should have been a fun episode turned out to be a bit of a slog. Through no fault of my own, mind you. So tomorrow, we wrap up this documentary series, so I will see you then for the main course.